Welcome to your deep dive. Today, we're going to tackle a question that's both ancient and totally mind-bending. How did life go from basic single-celled organisms to, well, us?
Yeah, that's a big one.
It is. You've given us a chapter from a book that dives deep into the evolution of agency, that ability to act independently. And I'm excited to kind of unravel this mystery with you.
It really is remarkable when you think about it. Evolution doesn't have a goal in mind.
Yeah.
Yet somehow it's produced this incredible diversity and complexity of life, each with its own level of agency.
Right. It almost feels like magic. So let's start at the very beginning with the simplest forms of life. Even single-celled organisms have some level of agency, don't they?
Absolutely. We might think of them as simple, but even single-celled organisms act with purpose. They need to survive, which means finding food and avoiding danger.
Right.
To do that, they're constantly taking in information about their environment and their own internal state.
So it's more than just randomly bumping around.
Right.
They're actually processing information and making decisions.
Exactly. It's like they have a built-in program that tells them if this, then that. If they sense nutrients, they move towards them. If they sense a threat, they move away. It's what the chapter calls mechanistic cognition.
Mechanistic cognition. What exactly does that mean?
Think of it like a super efficient but very specialized computer program. These organisms are incredibly good at what they do, but they're not very flexible. They can't easily adapt to new situations.
That makes sense. So if they're so good at surviving with this mechanistic cognition, what drove the evolution of greater complexity? Wasn't that simple life already successful?
Well, there's a limit to how complex you can get when you're running on a very tight energy budget. Bacteria, for example, are masters of efficiency. They only produce the proteins they absolutely need, and sometimes even ditch genes to conserve energy. It's all about making the most of what they have.
That's fascinating. It's like they're living the minimalist lifestyle, but out of necessity, not choice. So how did life overcome this energy barrier and take that leap towards greater complexity?
That's where the story takes a truly amazing turn. The secret lies in a process called symbiosis, and more specifically, in the evolution of mitochondria. Imagine, billions of years ago, a single-celled organism engulfed a bacterium, but instead of digesting it, they struck up a partnership. This bacterium eventually became what we know as mitochondria, the powerhouse of eukaryotic cells.
Wait, so the mitochondria that power our cells were once free-living bacteria?
Yeah.
That completely changes how I think about my own body. But how did this partnership solve the energy problem?
Think of it like the invention of agriculture for humans. Before agriculture, we were spending most of our energy just trying to find food. Agriculture created a surplus of energy, which allowed for population growth, specialization, and ultimately the rise of complex societies. Yeah. Similarly, mitochondria provided a massive energy surplus for these early cells. They weren't just scraping by anymore. They had the power to build something bigger and more complex.
That's such a brilliant analogy. So this symbiotic leap was really the key to unlocking greater complexity. But the chapter also mentions that with multicellularity came a whole new set of challenges. What were some of the hurdles life had to overcome at that stage?
Multicellularity, whether through cells clumping together or staying connected after dividing, brought about a need for cooperation and coordination. Cells couldn't just go about their business independently anymore. They had to work together for the survival of the whole organism.
Yeah, I can imagine that presented some serious dilemmas. I mean, wouldn't there be a temptation for some cells to cheat and prioritize their own survival or reproduction over the good of the group?
Absolutely. And that's a constant tension in multicellular life. The chapter gives the example of dictyostelium amoebas. When food is scarce, they come together to form these slug-like creatures that can move and find new food sources. Some cells even sacrifice themselves to form a stalk that helps disperse spores, allowing other cells to reproduce.
It's almost like a tiny socialist society with cells willingly sacrificing themselves for the greater good. It makes you wonder about the very origins of altruism, doesn't it?
It really does. But there are also examples of conflict and competition, even within a single organism. In some aggregations of cells, there's always the risk of individuals trying to sneak their way into the reproductive line, even if it harms the collective. Over time, though, mechanisms evolve to prevent this kind of cheating, like ensuring that only genetically identical cells aggregate. It's a fascinating balance between cooperation and competition, much like we see in human societies.
It seems like this tension between individual and collective good is a fundamental theme in the evolution of life, right? But let's talk about movement. How did these multicellular organisms actually move in a coordinated way? I can't imagine a giant blob of cells being very good at navigating the world.
You're right. Movement and behavior require a whole new level of coordination. This is where muscles and neurons enter the scene. Muscles are specialized for contraction, and neurons evolve to transmit signals rapidly across long distances. This allows for coordinated muscle activity and ultimately purposeful movement.
So it's like an intricate communication network within the organism allowing for complex actions. The chapter gives the example of the hydra, which seems like a pretty remarkable creature, even without a brain.
The hydra is a great example of an early organism with a simple nervous system. They have what's called a nerve net, a diffuse network of neurons that coordinates a limited set of movements, like feeding, locomotion, and responding to stimuli.
So even without a centralized brain, the hydra is still capable of making choices and interacting with its environment. That's incredible. What I'm really curious about is how this nerve net actually works. Does it control all the hydra's movements at once, or are there specific parts of the net that handle different tasks?
That's a great question. It turns out that different parts of the nerve net are specialized for different actions. For example, there are specific subnetworks that control feeding behavior, others that control locomotion, and so on. These subnetworks work together to coordinate the hydra's movements, allowing it to be a dynamic, autonomous agent in its environment.
So even though it's a relatively simple system, there's still a surprising amount of organization and complexity in how the hydra's nerve net functions. This really challenges our assumptions about what intelligence means, doesn't it? It's not just about having a big brain, it's about how you use the information you have to make choices and interact with the world.
Exactly. And what's really fascinating is that the basic principles we see in the hydra, using a nervous system to process information and make choices, are the foundation for the incredible diversity of brains and behaviors we see across the animal kingdom. But to really see how these principles can lead to even greater complexity, we need to jump ahead in evolution and meet a very special little worm.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Let's meet this worm and see what it can teach us about the evolution of agency.
This worm's name is C. elegans, and it's a real superstar in the world of biology. What makes it so special is that every single C. elegans has the same number and types of cells arranged in exactly the same way.
Wow, that's incredible. So every single worm is like an identical twin.
Precisely. And that makes them an incredible model for studying how genes and neurons shape behavior. Scientists can literally map out every single neuron in their nervous system, which is relatively simple, but still amazingly organized.
Okay, so we're talking about a much more complex nervous system than the hydra's nerve net. How is it organized?
Think of it like a well-structured company. You have your sensory neurons, the frontline workers gathering information from the outside world. Then there are the inner neurons, the middle management that process and integrate that information. And finally, you have the motor neurons, the action takers that control the worm's muscle.
So there's a clear flow of information from sensing the environment to making decisions and taking action. But how does C. elegans use this system to make more complex choices than, say, the hydra?
Well, for one thing, C. elegans can integrate information from multiple sources. It's not just reacting to a single stimulus. It's weighing different factors and making decisions based on the bigger picture.
Can you give me an example of what that looks like in action?
Imagine a C. elegans worm is hungry and senses a delicious patch of bacteria nearby, but it also detects a predator lurking in the same area. Now the worm has to decide, is the food worth the risk?
That's a tough choice. How does it weigh those options?
That's where its internal state comes in. How hungry is the worm? How strong is the threat? It's constantly balancing its internal needs and drives with the information it's getting from the environment.
So it's not just reacting to the environment, it's also factoring in its own internal state, like its level of hunger or fear, to make a more informed decision. It sounds almost like, well, I don't want to say conscious, but certainly more complex than just a simple stimulus response system.
It really highlights the fact that even seemingly simple creatures are capable of a surprising level of sophistication in their decision-making. But what's even more remarkable is that C. elegans can actually learn from its experiences and modify its behavior accordingly.
Wait, a worm can learn? That's incredible. I thought learning was something only animals with complex brains could do.
It might seem surprising, but C. elegans exhibits several forms of learning. They can habituate, meaning they get used to a repeated stimulus and stop responding to it. They can become sensitized, meaning they become more sensitive to a stimulus after a negative experience. And they can even learn through association.
Association. So like Pavlov's dogs, they learn to connect a bell with food.
Exactly. C. elegans can learn to associate certain smells, for example, with positive or negative outcomes. Let's say a worm encounters a particular type of bacteria that makes it sick. The next time it encounters that smell, it'll likely avoid it.
So it's not just pre-programmed instincts driving their behavior. They're actually using their experiences to shape their future actions. That's a whole other level of agency. But how does this learning actually happen in their tiny worm brains?
It comes down to changes in the connections between neurons. You see, the nervous system of C. elegans is essentially pre-wired, meaning each neuron has a specific set of connections. But the strength of those connections can change based on experience.
So it's like a network of paths in a forest. The more you walk a particular path, the more defined and well-worn it becomes. And the less you use a path, the more it gets overgrown and fades away.
That's a perfect analogy. When a worm learns something new, it's essentially strengthening certain neural pathways and weakening others, creating a new map in its brain that reflects its experiences. And this ability to learn allows C. elegans to adapt to its specific environment and make choices that go beyond pre-programmed instincts. Each worm, despite having the same genetic blueprint, develops its own unique set of experiences and therefore its own unique neural map.
So it's almost like each worm develops its own little personality based on its individual experiences.
Exactly. And this highlights a crucial point. Even though C. elegans is a relatively simple organism, it demonstrates that learning and experience can lead to a level of individuality, even in creatures we might consider programmed or robotic.
This is really blowing my mind. We've gone from single-celled organisms making basic choices to a worm that can learn, adapt, and even develop individual tendencies. It makes you wonder, where does this all lead? What are the next steps in the evolution of agency?
Well, to answer that, we need to look at how these internal signals and feedback loops become even more sophisticated, paving the way for the incredible diversity and complexity of behavior we see in the animal kingdom.
Yeah, it's amazing to think that something as seemingly simple as a worm can lay the groundwork for such complex concepts as individuality and personality. It really makes you appreciate the incredible power of evolution to build upon these basic building blocks.
It really does. And as we move further along the evolutionary tree, we see those internal signals and feedback loops becoming even more sophisticated. Think about those internal signals we mentioned earlier, like serotonin and dopamine. In C. elegans, they play a crucial role in guiding behavior. But in more complex animals, they become part of intricate systems of reward and motivation.
So these chemicals aren't just about reacting in the moment, they're about learning and adapting for the future.
Exactly. These internal signals help animals evaluate what's good or bad for their survival and then adjust their actions accordingly. It's like a built-in feedback system that helps them learn what to seek out and what to avoid. And as nervous systems become more complex, these feedback loops become increasingly sophisticated, leading to more nuanced and flexible behaviors.
It's like those signals are shaping the very way animals experience the world, driving them towards certain actions and away from others. It makes you wonder how much of our own behavior is shaped by these subconscious feedback loops.
That's a fascinating question, and one that researchers are still trying to unravel. But what we see in C. elegans is a glimpse into the fundamental mechanisms that underlie learning and motivation across a wide range of species. It suggests that these processes, while incredibly complex in humans, are built upon ancient foundations that have been conserved throughout evolution.
That's a pretty humbling thought, isn't it? To think that the roots of our own complex behaviors might lie in the simple learning mechanisms of a tiny worm. It really blurs the lines between simple and complex life, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And it underscores the interconnectedness of all living things. We often think of ourselves as separate from the rest of nature, but when we look at the fundamental mechanisms that drive behavior, we see remarkable similarities across a vast spectrum of life.
This deep dive has been a truly eye-opening journey. We started by exploring how even single-celled organisms exhibit a basic form of agency. Then we saw how symbiosis, this incredible collaboration between different organisms, provided the energy boost needed for life to take a leap towards greater complexity.
And from there, the evolution of muscles and neurons revolutionized how organisms interact with the world, paving the way for coordinated movement and increasingly sophisticated behaviors. We saw how even simple creatures like the hydra with its nerve net and C. elegans with its more complex nervous system are capable of making choices and shaping their actions based on their experiences.
The fact that C. elegans can learn from its experiences and even develop individual tendencies really challenged my assumptions about what it means to be intelligent. It's clear that agency isn't just about having a big brain. It's about using information both from the environment and from within to make decisions and navigate the world.
And what's truly remarkable is that the fundamental principles we see in these simpler organisms are the very same principles that underlie the incredible diversity and complexity of behavior we see across the animal kingdom, including in ourselves.
It's a reminder that we're all part of this grand evolutionary story connected by shared mechanisms that have been shaped over billions of years.
Absolutely. And as we continue to explore the mysteries of life, we'll undoubtedly uncover even more fascinating insights into the nature of agency and the incredible journey that has led to the remarkable diversity of life we see today.
This has been an incredible exploration. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the evolution of agency. We'll see you next time for another fascinating journey into the world of